Welcome back, Perfect Peeps, to Purrfect.dev. Today on the podcast, Tim Neutkens. What's up, Tim?
Hey, thanks for having me.
You may all notice I'm missing my cats behind me if you watch this regularly. I moved my house and went on vacation and still haven't put my studio together. So I'm working with what I've got, and unfortunately, Tim gets to stare at the blank purple wall behind me.
I don't have a wall as well, so like it is mostly just blank and two doors, which do seem like they're next to each other, but they're actually not. But
I was gonna ask you, like, you have kind of a quick exit either way you go.
no, it's actually like the door behind me on that side is the laundry room, so I can only exit through the other side.
Nice.
But yeah, it's been nice. I recently moved here. Actually moved places as well. I'm living closer to Amsterdam now.
Cool.
So it's actually really quick to get to Amsterdam, like only 12 minutes by train. So yeah, that's been good. I moved here in November last year, so almost a year here. Yeah.
Very cool. I haven't been to Amsterdam probably in 15 years, to show my age a little bit. It's a fun town for sure. It's very chill.
Yeah.
So for those of you who do not know the face, which at this point I'd be shocked if you're watching our show and you don't know Tim. Tim is actually part of the Next.js team, or also the Vercel team is probably the more correct way of putting that. Can you just tell us a little bit about kind of what you do at Vercel/Next.js?
You were cutting out for a second.
Okay, yeah.
So
just curious. So if I completely blanked out there, I'll cut this out. But
yeah, that's fine.
So Tim is actually part of the Vercel team, but he's also the co-author of Next.js, and as well as MDX and Micro and NCC. But I'm kind of curious if you, in your own words, would like to describe kind of what you do at Vercel.
Yeah, definitely. So my team at Vercel maintains the Next.js framework, and most of the things related to that as well. So like you obviously have the Next.js framework itself, which allows you to build web apps, web applications, websites, like anything from like marketing websites to like full-fledged web apps. And then like there's a few like other moving parts that that Next.js like either uses or is like basically has it built in. So like libraries like .jsx, NCC, like you mentioned, is something that we built to basically bundle JavaScript into like a single file. And like notably, like my team also includes the co-author of or the author of Webpack, Tobias Koppers. So we practically also maintain Webpack and some of the REST tooling that we're working on recently as well, like SWC. So we're basically doing a lot of open source related things. And then inside of Vercel, we also work on the integration between Vercel and Next.js. So like making sure that if you're hosting on Vercel, that goes smoothly, together with the Vercel product teams as well, and like other engineering teams. And yeah, that's basically like what my team does. We maintain the Next.js framework, so handle like anything from issues to pull requests coming in, answering discussions. So and basically like my role in all that has gone from because Next has been like was released 4 years ago or so. I've been at Vercel for 3 years. And like in between that 1 year, the initial year, I was contributing a lot to Next.js itself. We basically so for my side, I basically went from contributing a lot to the Next.js code base to now being more of a tech lead, working on. I basically helping out the rest of the team and blocking them and helping them move along in the Next.js code base, as well as some of the projects that we're working on.
Nice. Just to kind of like go back in time a little bit there with Next.js, how did, like you said you were a contributor, but did like Guillermo sit down with you and say, hey, I want to start this thing? Or how did it become Next.js, like version 0.1 or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, before the public release, there was basically a Next.js was created out of the need of building the Vercel dashboard. So when they started building the whole website for the Vercel platform 4 years ago, they basically ended up with, like, there wasn't really like a good solution for building full web apps using either React, but it even started as something completely different as well. Like, it wasn't using React in the initial like first version.
Oh, wow.
It used a custom templating engine, and then that could be server rendered and client side rendered as well. But basically, like right before they wanted to open source it back then, they decided like, oh, let's try and try it out with React. And then Nayuki and Guillermo basically got together in Tokyo, and they wrote this document that basically turned into the Next.js documentation of the time. And it was mostly like documentation driven. So they wrote the docs of like how it would be like perfect in their sense. Like how it was supposed to work, like get initial props, which is what we had back then, and a lot of other things, like pages directory, routing, client-side routing, that kind of stuff. So that was all laid out in the document, and then Nayuki basically ended up like implementing all that as the initial version, and then eventually like React also was added to that mix basically. That became Next.
Was that about the time that you stepped in, or were you part of kind of right after that?
Yeah, so right after it was publicly announced, Guillermo basically reached out to me because I was already like pretty heavily involved in the Vercel community. I was helping out on this terminal built on web technologies called Hyper. Okay. And I was just randomly fixing good first issues, that kind of stuff. And it was quite active on the Slack community that they had back then.
Okay.
So eventually I got in touch with Guillermo, basically being like, hey, I'm working on all these like Hyper pull requests. And he was like, hey, maybe you should look at this new thing that we're building called Next.js. And I basically like had a look, and I was working on mostly PHP related stuff back then. So like it was my day job was basically building Magento web shops.
Okay.
And like some Symfony and WordPress as well. Next to that, and like did a lot of really custom PHP stuff for some of the largest companies in the Netherlands, like working for an agency. And then eventually we basically I was looking at Next, and I was like, hey, this feels familiar in the sense that like I can create a pages directory. Every single file that you create is automatically mapped to a route. And it actually makes the experience a lot better, even for like back then, by allowing you to make changes and immediately see them on the screen without having to refresh or do anything else. Because hot module replacement wasn't like super popular at the time. That had very good reasons for like PHP apps obviously don't run as a normal like instance that you're running that's always running your code. So it doesn't like it can't keep state. At least like back then it wasn't very common to do that.
True.
So eventually like I was like, okay, this sounds interesting, and I'll just like start helping out on good first issues because I was just learning a lot of JavaScript in my free time, and then I just started helping out, and that eventually became sort of like the main thing that I was like working on in my free time on open source. So I was doing a lot of pull requests to just like make tiny changes and like things that were like could be updated, but just like people wouldn't get around to it basically because there weren't like that many contributors, especially at that time. And then there was a lot of the examples directory already existed. So I also contributed a bunch of examples for like how to use Next.js with technology X or Y. Yeah.
Nice. It's always good to dive into that documentation and provide examples. It's a huge step forward for people.
Yeah, exactly.
Tim, with kind of diving in and getting as part of the Vercel back then, probably Zeit team, and getting used to Next.js and growing it. Prior to that, it sounds like you had a lot of PHP experience, but this was kind of more in the React world. Were you like a fan of React, or were you just kind of like starting to learn React because of this project and dive into it further?
Yeah, the funny story there is that I actually learned React by contributing to Hyper, because Hyper was actually like in the initial version was using React as the rendering engine for the terminal. That obviously is not the most ideal thing to use for a terminal, like mostly because of the massive output. Especially at the time, it would block the main thread quite often.
Okay.
So eventually, like in Hyper itself was moved away to using WebGL, same rendering engine that VS Code uses. So we worked a lot on that, but besides the point. So I learned React through that. That was also using Redux. So like every time you type something, it was Redux action. And we were using React at the company I was working for mostly to build out some of the like more client-side application type things. And yeah, I really liked it. At the time, I didn't really look into like any of the other solutions. More so, I had used Angular before. Vue, I didn't see it at the time, so I learned about it a lot later. And yeah, so basically, like eventually, I just ended up using React a lot, and then like contributing to Next. Obviously, I was learning quite a lot there as well. And eventually, yeah, like basically just continued on that and like building on top of the like existing foundation that was there in Next already.
That's really cool. Yeah, it's always amazing to me, like when people dive into a project and like when you go to get hired somewhere and they quiz you on something, it's like, well, I've never done that, but like just having the background and knowledge of something like that, you can learn and pick it up. So I'm always curious, like people's journeys through stuff like that. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
So after you kind of starting building up Next.js and you've created these examples now and you're building that, it sounds like you basically became the lead maintainer, one of the lead maintainers of Next.js. What's that like? Like Next.js is massive and continues growing. What's it like having to lead something that size?
It's fun. Like I mostly like what I like about it is that we didn't really like start out as like this massively used framework. Like when it was released back in 2016 in October, I believe, from top of my mind, 15 October or something like that. We basically it had some adoption, but it wasn't like anything major, and it was received quite interestingly because people were not so into the server-side rendering part of things, and it just like took a while to resonate with people. Like, hey, this might actually like make sense to use this or this approach to building web apps. Mostly as most of the other solutions, like especially in the React space, were very focused on client-side rendering. And the sentiment back then was like, oh, we're not going to do any like server-side rendering because everything is rendered on the client, so it's faster. Which in practice could be true, but it depended on where you are in the world and like which customers you're serving, and a lot of other variables. So yeah, like we just steadily started like adding all the features that people were asking for, or like the main things that were like issues that people would run into. And then really like naturally it got a lot of adoption from larger companies, and we didn't really like do anything or talk to them even, and we just saw that happen over time. Later on, basically what I learned was that a lot of these companies were building their own internal Next.js type framework, and there would like either like happen like one of two things would happen. The one is they would end up like spending a lot of time on having to maintain this framework and this like infrastructure. And generally, like the other case that we saw happen a lot was that the people that would start building these frameworks internally would move away to other jobs or other companies even. So like either they move to different teams inside of the company because like other teams also need this kind of solution and they have built it before. And then the teams that would have that solution already would not be sure like what to do anymore with that framework. And like the main difference there is that like internal self-built versus like open source external is that it ends up with a lot more documentation, examples, and other way like how to use this thing type solutions. So like early on we saw a lot of that. And over time, we started adding more and more like sort of the building blocks that you have in Next today that allow you to build like larger apps. And basically like make sure that like the nice thing that we can do in Next is that we can keep optimizing the like fundamental building blocks. So we can still make compilation a lot faster. We can still make the performance of your app a lot faster. And the nice thing about Next is that we can do it in a way that is sort of like backwards compatible and gives you a really smooth path towards like better performance, better speed of your application. So like what we saw is that over time, as we kept releasing these performance improvements, Next got more adoption as well. And obviously like the way that open source sort of works nowadays is that if people see a lot of adoption, other people will also jump in and try like start using the same solutions that other people are using. So it's sort of like a network effect almost, because like we're not like the first few years we didn't do like much marketing. We did some talks. We did like write the documentation and rewrite it a few times, provide examples, all that. And that really like laid the foundation that we have today, basically. Like a lot of the things that were already there years ago are still here today, and we've just like built it on top of them and improved that.
Yeah, that's really incredible. You talk about some of those larger companies. Have you like, I know on Vercel's page, I assume it's similar to Next. You're working with like McDonald's and Washington Post and like huge companies. Are those people that you work daily with, or is there a whole like separate support team that you guys are working with?
Yeah, so we have multiple teams inside of Vercel. And then like over the last year or so, we've also grown like multiple teams, like some teams that help out on like if you come to us with like, okay, we have a Next.js app and we want to scale it out to massive amounts of traffic. And like how to leverage Vercel and the Vercel platform for that. So we have folks helping with that in particular. We also have folks on the solutions team that basically helps with like if you start as a like enterprise customer at Vercel, like here we can help you and give you advice on like, okay, this is what you can do to either improve performance of your app or like developer experience of how your team is working with Next.js, all that. And then like my team in particular is working a lot with like larger companies that are like, they want specific optimizations or like performance improvements. Like they see slow builds or like want faster development iteration loops. And we're like currently focusing a lot on making sure that the performance of Next is it's fast enough to like handle these larger cases. It already handles that, but it can be a lot faster still. So we're currently working on like rewriting a lot of the tool chain that is used in Next to Rust, like I mentioned before. And there's some really like large performance improvements coming for that.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I can't wait for some of the Rust stuff to hit. It's going to be crazy fast. Kind of jumping back a little bit on the lead maintainer piece. How do you like decide what PRs and things to go after first? I mean, there's a ton of them, right? Like Next has 74,000 stars. It's a massive project. And I've seen at certain times where you've had to say like, hey, we're not doing this. I've got to close this PR just immediately. And then you get all this flack. Like, how do you handle that as a massive open source project and a leader for it?
Yeah, it's tricky. Like overall, we try to land as like much as possible that like community PRs or even like our own PRs, like sometimes like even our own stuff that we build and like try to work out doesn't work out, and then like we obviously also close those as being like, okay, this was a experiment and like it's not going to work, so like please don't use it. Like we have experimental flags and all that.
Yeah.
From the side of like the main problem that you get as you get larger is that there's more and more and more people that have all these different use cases,
Right.
and every single use case that you couldn't come up with is going to be found by someone else.
Yeah.
So if you release a feature, any feature, if it's a single flag inside of the Next.js config, which might seem as simple as possible, it's just like an on or off switch. There will be cases where there are edge cases that people will find that breaks their app or it doesn't work or like that kind of thing. So anything that we add is a maintenance burden for my team, basically. And in general, like when we add things, that's fine. Like we know that there's the trade-off of the framework itself expanding and like having more features. What we try to do as well is like make sure that the fundamentals stay good over time. So what that means is that instead of adding maybe like 20 features in the last like 5 months or so, we've instead been working on improving performance of all Next.js apps. And that trade-off is really hard to understand if you're not working on the thing itself, because like you might come in tomorrow and be like, okay, I need this feature because otherwise like I can't ship to production, and like I need all this other like flags that Next.js is not giving me, and then be like really unhappy with that specific like feature being missing. Whereas if then today we say, or like if we then tomorrow we say like, okay, here's a new release, and now your developer experience is like 100% faster or like 10x faster or something like that, then you're still like upset of the feature missing, but a little bit happier because your developer experience is much faster.
Right.
So it's really like continuously balancing if a feature that people ask for is something that a lot of people want, because we obviously can't also add features specifically only for like one specific app in particular. So what we try to do is always try to find a generic solution and work with people to figure out if like adding something makes sense. And then there's obviously always a backlog of the things that we already think that like make sense, but we just haven't gotten around to implementing them.
Nice.
So like over time, we keep adding features, and obviously like keep adding maintenance burden for ourselves as well in the process. But that is all right. Like we just try to add the features that are logical and like make sense to add into Next.js. So like there's like many examples of like people getting super upset because like we close a specific feature request that like more than a few people want, but don't really make sense for like Next.js in the long run. Like good example of that would be like changing the pages directory. Like it might sound like a simple change, but like a good example there is if you allow for changing the dist directory, which we did add like very early on, it gives so many like other use cases that people hadn't seen before, that it makes like building generic solutions really hard. So like if you are allowed to change the dist here, which we do allow currently, the next start can't find the dist directory, for example. Like it has to read next config and try to find all of these things. So like we always try to find the right like feature and heuristic and thing that will make your life easier. Yeah, so like there's still a lot of things that we want to do, but just like haven't gotten around to, basically.
Yeah, it's a super tough
because we're
balance.
focusing on performance and other things. Yeah.
So this is probably a really great segue, since the title of this pod is reviewing Next.js 11 features. So I think I have this right when I looked at it. For the actual tag version 11, there was 326 commits. So we were talking about like those changes, and a lot of people have already said, well, there wasn't much change in version 11. Well, I can tell you right now, there's a ton of commits against it. How do you go about like testing all of those changes to say, okay, we have a full dot or a major release coming out? How do you go about saying it's okay to release, and how many RCs do you have to go through, and like tests do you have to perform? What's that look like from your side, Tim?
Yeah, so what we currently have is we have this integration test suite that is like mostly our whole like test suite. So I think that like 99 or 98% of all tests that we write are integration tests in Next.js. Trade-off there is that it's a lot slower to run, but we try to parallelize that. But basically, those run against like real Next.js apps that are built specifically to test out the features that we're adding. So if you have Next Link or Next Head, like those are run in a real browser, and we try to we don't try, we actually do. We click the link like programmatically, and then like check if the navigation happens, that kind of stuff. We even do that for fast refresh. So like for you make a change to a file, does it update in the browser? And if you make an error, does that give the error overlay, that kind of stuff? So for every single feature, we have these integration tests running against the whole code base, basically. So like it's a real Next.js app, boots up like normal Next.js apps using the CLI, and then like we ran a bunch of like browser tests against it. So that's really like how we do things from the testing side of things. And then for the release side of things, so like how do you do releases? We currently have a like stable channel, so that's just a normal like 11.0, 11.1, etc. And the canary channel. So the canary channel is actually a sort of more of like a beta channel that does run against like same test suite that we have for all Next.js apps, like all those Next.js apps running against the same code base. So in general, like the canary releases could be more stable than the stable releases because of the way that we always add tests for all the bugs that we fix and all that. So what you can do is you can actually install like npm install next add canary, and then it will get you the latest canary release, which is generally the one from the day before or like the last time we released it. But in general, we end up releasing at least once per day, just because the team has grown, and like we're at a point now where a lot of pull requests are being landed all the time, and we tend to do release after most pull requests being landed. Cool. So yeah, that's like how we do releases currently. And then like for a stable release, we just take the latest canary and do a new release, a stable release, and then that's just published to npm. Because we have, practically speaking, we have everything automated. So like the only thing that you as a developer like working on Next has to do is run one command and say like which version you want to release. So just like yarn publish stable or publish canary, and then like it does for Canary, it even figures out like what version it's going to be, because it's always the same. Like the same version tag in that sense as a standard format. And then for stable, it asks you, do you want to release a major, minor, or patch?
Nice.
Or like even like some other like custom format if you want to, but we don't do that. Yeah.
Cool. No, that's great. That's good insight for those that are kind of working on Next and also using it too. That's really cool. So Next 11, after talking about kind of how you integrate all those changes and how much is in it, what are the biggest takeaways for you? I kind of pulled out of it, and mine are still the collaborative preview, conformance, the image tag, and the script tag.
Yeah.
Do you want to kind of? Okay.
Yeah, it's like the nice thing about this release is that everything that has been released in this release is super exciting and has a measurable impact on performance in various ways. So it's not just about like application performance, but also developer experience. So like the biggest thing that we released is the conformance system, which is basically a set of ESLint rules that help you towards building a more performant web application. And we've been adding onto those after the 11 release as well. So like there's a lot more rules already if you install Next right now. And like besides conformance, so that's built on top of ESLint and can check like any JavaScript file. It will basically like warn you if you're using a normal A tag for a internal link, for example. So like to get client-side routing, it warrants you to use like font in a certain way to make sure that font optimization works, which is basically like inlining the font, which reduces the like first contentful paint, basically. Adds some priority there, basically. And it basically warrants you for more of these specific rules that we have, that we know that if you like add synchronous scripts, for example, that is now recommended to use like Next script, which gives us more control over where the script itself is being loaded. So as like most people know, like if you build a website or web application, there's always going to be an external service that says like, hey, put this script tag into the head, like Google Analytics, Tag Manager, that kind of stuff. Or even like external services like chat windows and chat boxes, that kind of stuff. So with Next script, we can actually say like, okay, this script has to be loaded once we know that the hydration is done for React. So like everything is already interactive. And that could actually improve performance for if you're, for example, like you want to have a faster first contentful paint, because like there will be no blocking scripts, because the Next script element ensures that you don't have blocking scripts, basically. So basically guides you towards this like more performant usage of external scripts. As we saw that like one of the biggest performance issues that you can have in a website is actually including synchronous scripts and scripts that are from external parties that you don't need to have those don't have to be loaded immediately per se, except for like the analytics part maybe. But for like an external like chat window that like pops up in the side of your screen, you probably want to have that loaded at a lower priority than all the other things. So that's what Next script helps with. And then like Next image, we expanded that. So in Next 10, we released Next image. And Next image is this image component for React that has optimization of images built in. And now we actually have expanded that to also have blur placeholders. It's like you can basically have blurry placeholders by importing images. So that's a new feature as well.
Yeah, that
we're still working on some of the basically collecting feedback around images and like how people are using them, and trying to improve the developer experience and user experience there still.
Yeah, that's an amazing feature when you can kind of deal with the local images in that blur up and how small it basically becomes when you're including that blur. It's like less than a K, and it turns out like
Yeah.
larger than that. So it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, and the main thing there as well is that the like if you use next image, all images are standard like lazy loaded, which is also why the blur is useful there. And then um, on top of that, it optimizes and serves like optimized images as well, because that's like
Yeah.
built into Next. So you get WebP and soon also AVIF, the new format. Um, and yeah, that's really helped with like basically like if you start a web app and you forget to optimize your images, like Next Image will just do it automatically if you're using it. And then the neat thing about the image imports as well is that you don't have to provide a width and height for Next Image, because that's a requirement on Next Image to ensure that you don't get layout shift, which basically means that like items shift around the page as a image is loaded, because the space needed for the image is not taken up when you load the page. Next Image guides you towards doing that basically.
Yeah, it's really incredible. I know for the conformance piece, you guys worked really closely with the Google team on that, since they're kind of laying out. I don't know if you call it a RFC or what it is, but on the conformance side, did you guys work with them to kind of help you with a lot of these other changes as well?
Yeah, so basically Next Script, Next Image came out of the Chrome Aurora team. It
Okay.
actually has a name now. It's a team inside of Google that is, or like inside of the Chrome organization, that is basically helping frameworks with performance optimizations, and like basically making sure that the outcomes of like web applications being built with various frameworks are basically like too standard or like more optimized than today. And we've been working with them for more than 2 years now, actually. But it previously didn't have like really have a name. Now there's actually a blog post about it as well,
Yeah.
which you can find on web.dev, which I'm sure you'll include in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. I
So
run my site through there all the time. So
yeah. So in the like in that blog post, it basically is explained like what they're doing exactly, why they're working with us on the Next.js team. Like one of the reasons there is that like it basically like because Next.js is being used by so many really large companies, it is being used by a large percentage of like really like top websites. So there's a really high impact. Like if you make a change in Next, it's going to propagate to a lot of like React users basically. And then the nice thing from this as well is that landing these optimizations is not just good for like Next.js itself, but also for the whole ecosystem. Because like a lot of this like font optimization has landed in Angular as well. The conformance bit has landed in Angular as well, and like not even from the Google side of things, because like obviously like those teams are in touch as well. Like in Next, you also have an image component now in image optimization, and a bunch of other frameworks have like copied or like looked into like some of the optimizations that we've done together with the Chrome team as well. So like a larger optimization is one that was investigated by the Chrome team for like a better chunking algorithm that gives a like basically the maximum amount of JavaScript files for a given app. Like what is the right like order of including all of those JavaScript modules into separate bundles, and like what to optimize for to ensure that your like browser caching is not thrown out all the time, versus like having smaller bundles and like faster loading performance. So that had a really huge impact on like how the chunking like works in Next.js, and that reduced bundle sizes tremendously for some apps by like a really big chunk, especially for like homepage loads, that kind of stuff. And that has now been included as the default in Webpack 5. So every single Webpack app that uses split chunks has this as the default. And it's being used in some other frameworks as well. So like this collaboration basically allows the Chrome team to experiment and figure out like what is the like right approach to solving like injecting scripts, that kind of stuff. While also like having a test bed for that. So like it's not just an experiment; they're actually shipping it to production inside of Next.js,
Awesome.
and like we're measuring the performance of that as well.
Really cool that like it's not just helping individual framework; it's kind of helping the web as a whole to improve across all of that. You mentioned Webpack 5, and it kind of piqued my ear a little bit. I noticed in upgrading from 10 to 11, the Webpack 5, I think prior to that, it was already kind of standard and you had to opt out of it type of thing. I noticed there was possibly, and this is maybe a question, some additional polyfills that came in. So there's some things that I had to put kind of in my config prior to that to ignore like node packages when they came in through ESMs and things like that, where they would show up with FS in them, so the file server and stuff like that. And is that because of Webpack 5 coming into play that those were kind of reduced down, and did that alleviate a lot of things you guys were dealing with in Webpack 4?
It actually is the other way around. So
Okay.
Webpack 5 dropped all polyfills. And what we did in Next is actually add the polyfills that were in Webpack 4 into Next.
Gotcha.
So like into the Webpack config that we use for Next, to ensure that you as an end user can just upgrade to the latest Next.js version, don't get any breakage. Like in the near future, we're planning to actually show a warning when you have some of these modules. The file system is not polyfilled though, so I'm not exactly sure why that didn't show up as an error.
Okay.
But basically the other libraries like DNS, crypto, that kind of stuff are still included if you use them in Next. With Webpack 5 enabled on Next.js 11, and the main reason for that is backwards compatibility. So like, yeah, it might be good to explain a bit there. Is that like we tend to make sure that like you can, as a user, can just upgrade to the latest version and have the minimal amount of friction if you didn't make any like specific config changes. So if you have custom Webpack config, obviously like if we upgrade Webpack and like have a new Webpack version, that is going to break in some way because like you had some custom config that we couldn't control. But if you had a like Next.js 10 app that didn't use any custom configuration, so no custom Webpack config or custom Babel config, it will just work if you ran on Webpack 11 or on Next.js 11. I mean,
Okay.
So that has been sort of like between releases, we've been really like particularly focused on making sure that you have this backwards compat, because we could have also said like, okay, we're going to release Next.js 11 and it's going to have Webpack 5, but without this backwards compat, so like without the polyfills, and without any way to like have a incremental pod towards using Webpack 5. So in like in the 10.x releases, we already introduced Webpack 4 and Webpack 5, and then Webpack 5 was the opt-in part.
Yeah.
Except for the cases where we knew that like you didn't have custom Webpack config, so we know that it's going to work. And that's been really successful. So like over the like past few months, so like most of this year actually, we went from running all apps on Webpack 4 to running all new apps on Webpack 4 without custom configuration. And then eventually like Next.js 11 was the last part there, which is Webpack 5 enabled for everyone. You can still opt out and use Webpack 4 for now, but we're planning to deprecate that in the near future to basically like get rid of a lot of the like legacy code that we have to support Webpack 4.
So
and it'll also enable some new features as well. Yeah.
I know from my experience going from 10 to 11, like we had a small customization that I was actually able to remove. I'm not sure exactly, probably because of the polyfills or something like that. But from what you've seen across the board, is it a pretty easy migration that people are finding from 10 to 11?
Yeah, we do have an upgrade guide. So if you go to nextjs.org/docs/upgrading, you end up with like basically all the steps that you have to take in order to make it fully compatible. But in practice, a lot of these steps are actually like more so like, okay, you can now remove this custom config and this custom config, and then like some of the features that have been deprecated for since Next.js 4 or something, we finally got around to removing them to just clean up some space in the browser panels for some cases. And we saw that like mostly no one is using those anymore. Obviously, because there's been a warning for them since Next.js 4.
And
But
finally, IE will die off.
yeah, so we still support Internet Explorer, but we're planning to also like move away from supporting Internet Explorer like around like the next few months or so, and then like also provide a way to use ES modules as well as the output of Next. So there's a
Give a
lot coming
small
there as
clap.
well. Yeah.
Finally.
Yeah, I'm excited about it as well because like now we can actually do less compilation, and like with the new compiler that we're working on, which we'll probably talk about later, it will allow us to do less transformation, so it will be slightly faster as well.
Well, that was kind of a fantastic segue with the later piece. We kind of had we were able to have kind of Next.js Conf special edition in June. I know we're kind of a few months out of that, but do we expect another Next.js Conf in October that will release Next.js 12?
I'm not exactly sure if I can talk about it yet.
Okay. We're just going to put that as a maybe, but
Yeah.
if we theoretically will have a
Yeah.
comp eventually, what are some of the things that you can talk about that you've been working on?
Yeah. So yeah, over the last few months, we've been working on migrating to REST-based toolchain, which is called SWC, which stands for Speedy Web Compiler. It's a project that basically was started as sort of a port of Babel. Not so much in like exactly how it works, but the output being fairly similar and much faster to compile. So like a difference of a few hundred milliseconds for Babel versus a few milliseconds for SWC. So it's much faster in that sense, and it allows us to basically preserve a lot of the optimizations that we do currently inside of Next.js because we have some custom Babel transforms, and we're currently porting those to SWC. And in doing so, we've also recently hired the author of SWC to work on my team as well. So KDY1 has joined the Next.js team to basically work on like SWC related like transformation, and that also has some impact on the whole ecosystem as a whole, like especially with the some of the newer frameworks using SWC as well, because we've been making a lot of these like improvements to like for example minification. So like currently what we do and what most like frameworks and like self-rolled libraries do is they use Cursor to minify their JavaScript, and Cursor is like really good at minifying actually. So like the output is really good. The main thing there is that it can be a lot faster to compile if you like write a native version of that. So we've been working with KDY to basically port all of the like cursor transforms to SWC so that SWC can do minification on a similar level to Cursor, but be much faster at doing so. And the initial results for that have been really good. It's been looking super good, like 10x improvement. and it basically like it's still not as optimized as it could be. And the nice thing that we're doing right now is that we also have some specific performance improvements for the minifier coming, specifically for Webpack bundle output. So like we can actually parallelize a lot of the like Webpack bundles as well, which is quite cool. So yeah, so that's like it basically is going to replace the Babel toolchain and the Cursor toolchain that we currently use, and then like all of that would be using SWC, but it works in slightly different ways between like compiling a single file and a whole bundle of compiled code out of Webpack. But yeah, there's some exciting performance improvements there, and like we're still working on other like avenues to better performance as well. So like rewriting other bits in Rust and doing some performance optimizations and like low-hanging fruit that we found in apps.
I know there's a LogRocket post out there about SWC versus Babel, and it kind of blew my mind with the numbers they're representing. I pulled it up real quick just to look through it again. They have an experiment out here with 4 promises on parallel 4, and Babel in ES5 is 27 operations per second, and SWC in ES3 is 1,704 operations per second. So it's magnitudes faster. It's kind of unbelievable. So I'm really excited that you guys have started that shift and are moving that way. I can't wait. To put it kind of somewhat in layman's terms, because a lot of us are just like front end developers. We don't know what's going on in the back end. I'll point at myself half the time. For a speed piece in SWC, where that really comes in, especially is in the build side. So your CI/CD pipeline, all of a sudden you're paying less for like getting that output. Will we see that on the dev server side too, speed and performance then?
Yeah. So the main two places where it's going to help is compiling single files. So if you make a change as a developer, you're making like some styling change or some other change that is inside of your React component, it's going to be much faster to get that onto your screen. And that's really like our main goal is to be as quick as possible in providing you that like update on the screen. So that's like one of the like main parts of that, and then the other is for cold builds, because like there's a difference between like a warm build, which is basically you have a cache available, it's already been compiled for the most part, and then like you have a single file change as well, because you make some change in the component and it has to recompile only that specific file and then the bundles that relate to it. Those cold builds will be a lot faster as well.
Awesome.
For warm builds, they will be faster too, but in a lesser magnitude because of the like less files needing to be compiled, obviously.
That's really cool. Yeah, I'm excited for that. So in the past, Tim, we've talked, and one of the cool features you guys have been working on is on-demand revalidation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So it's really good to explain like what revalidation is to begin with. So what you can do in Next is actually have a static page be regenerated after it's been generated during the build, or even like generate new static pages as well. Like after you create a page in your CMS, you can access that URL. It will be statically generated, cached in the Next.js server, and then you don't have to regenerate it again after like that part, except for if you make some changes. Obviously, like if you release a new blog post and you're like, oh wait, I made a 12 title is completely wrong, or like there's some typo, or I spelled someone's name wrong, and you're like, oh wait, I built a static page. Now I have to rerun the whole build, and it's going to take forever. And in the meantime, people can see that as well. So what we built inside of Next.js is that you have this revalidate property that allows you to regenerate a static page in the background. So a user goes to a page, they see the page itself that has been like cached already, and then in the background it's going to regenerate it, which is really useful if you have a live data feed. So, like, so for example, a CMS or like some like other data pipeline that is like semi-real time is what I generally call it. So it's not like you don't want to go to the page and see the latest reading of the database per se, because that's slower. But instead, like if it's 1 second off, that's totally fine. If they refresh, they see the update. And for many cases, like the CMS case, is generally fine to do that. However, like over time, once we released this feature, the first thing that people asked about, which is quite understandable, is like, how do I do this thing where if I create something in the CMS and it's updated, so I changed this person's name because I spelled it wrong, how can I get that to the website immediately? And that's basically like where on-demand revalidation comes from. So it's something that we've been investigating, and it allows you to basically send a signal from your CMS, if the CMS supports that, to a Next.js app, being like, hey, there's a change to this particular page or this particular like cache key. And in doing so, it can then, in the background, so still like all users that request a page see the not new generated page. They will in the background generate a new page, and then that is like obviously replaced again. And if you refresh, you see the update. The main upside to that is that you see these changes immediately, and you don't have to revalidate on demand. And like when a user goes to the page, basically, which allows you to basically like have less re-renders and less like execution in that sense because of that. And it also means that it's like mostly real time, because like if your database changes, you like basically send Next.js a signal, and it's updated on the front end as well, which is looking really good so far. And like once that is released, you can basically like tie that into your like CMS. So it's like, hey, post to this URL or something when this page changes.
That's really cool. I run into that a lot, especially like when I go to release a course and I'm like, oh, I screwed something up. I want to pull that back. It takes, currently I have my homepage set for an hour. It revalidates every hour. So it would be really nice to click a button or fire a URL or whatever and have it like, oh, okay, pull back, redo. So that's something that's really awesome to have.
I think we didn't talk about Next.js Live too much
yet,
but it's definitely something to check out. It allows you to basically run a Next.js app in the browser. We built a whole new development server for that, which runs in the service worker, and then we use WebAssembly based like SWC basically to compile files, and it basically, like the nice thing here is that it allows you to interactively work together with someone else. So you can actually share your like deployment URL or like a Next.js Live URL basically, because it's online, and then like you could basically look at the specific thing that I have built, and I could make changes while you're looking at it. Sort of like Chrome DevTools, but it's more immediate, and you see it in the page itself without having to be like looking at my screen, for example. So that allows for really like cool collaborative features, and it's like comment and talk to each other in that sense. Yeah.
So it's probably really helpful if you have like a remote team and your designers, like even though you're kind of in Figma or Miro or whatever doing your designs, to be able to jump in and actually, oh, let me code that real quick. How's this look? That sort of kind of back and forth. That's really neat.
Yeah, that's how, because Vercel's all remote, so that's how we're using it as well. So like interacting with designers on like, okay, this is the design system, and like, okay, this has to change, that kind of stuff. But also like because of the Vercel team being so remote that like, for example, I'm based out of the Netherlands, and there's only one other person in the Netherlands, but like he lives in the completely opposite side of the Netherlands, and doesn't work on my team as well. So it basically allows us to collaborate together as well, without having to like screen share and do a lot of other things there. Yeah.
Very cool. Oh, it's awesome. I can't wait for that. And I can't wait for the next Next.js Conf when it gets here. So great. This time we're gonna kind of do our fun Purrfect picks that we like to do. So my first and only perfect pick this week, Builder.io. It's something that popped up. If you don't follow Tyler McGinnis and UI Dev, awesome newsletter. Make sure you check it out. I'm always getting fun tidbits out of that one. I was able to check out Builder.io, and I'm always looking for something when you have clients that are not super technical and you have them like in a CMS backend that doesn't like correlate at all with the site they're working on, it becomes really tricky for them to change a lot of the page. And I think that's why like sites that have a true like builder and WYSIWYG and block templating becomes really popular is because of that. WordPress, even like they have their kind of new block builder that you can use and things like that. But prior to that, it was super challenging. And with all the new headless CMSs and things like that, it's still a challenge. Like if you use Sanity.io, I love Sanity, but their studio it's one flavor of it, and you're still kind of separated from the main site usually, unless you create your own backend. So the hope is that Builder.io starts to kind of bring that together. And one of the biggest parts that they're kind of leveraging right now is Shopify, because the huge e-commerce piece that's coming into play. So you'll see on their main page, they talk a lot about kind of where that marketing design kind of comes into the code piece. And if you go and walk through, they actually have a sweet Next.js Shopify build that's out there. And so this is kind of the code base you can start from. And then once you start to use that, you can come into, I hope it loads, here we go, a page like this, and you can start just changing around blocks and different things. So if I do that, easy to change, update, and release your code. So it's a really, really neat tool. I don't know that it's like 100% there yet, but it's got a really good start to it, and I'm excited to see where this one goes. So check out Builder.io.
I've been enjoying reading, which is fun because it's actually a colleague of mine now. Lee Robinson has been blogging about a lot of like Next.js related things that are like not particularly like, okay, here's how you build a Next.js app, but more so about here's all the like conceptual things that that like how like one of the latest like most popular like blog posts that he's written is everything I know about style guides, design systems, and component libraries. And there's some really like cool deep dive like blog posts and also like courses on Next.js that are now free on leerob.io indeed. Which is funny because I have the non-night version of it right now.
Let's see. There you go.
Yeah, so there's like some really cool blog posts that Lee has been working on. And recently, actually, his team expanded as well. So there's some more folks on the developer relations team at Vercel now as well, Delba as well, for example. And they've been doing some really cool stuff and really like deep dives into Next.js related like things that you have to know about. So like we recently added testing documentation to the Next.js docs, which we haven't shared too much publicly, like only on Twitter, I believe, and on the blog posts. But there's some really like cool, like more like deep dive type blog posts out there on like how to do various websites things. So like not just Next.js, but also like how do I design a website and like how does Stripe do this, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. So I think I heard this correctly when you said he's a colleague of yours. He's actually head of developer relations at Vercel now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I think I've been in touch with Lee a little bit. That's awesome. Well, very cool, Tim. I appreciate. I know you're a busy man, and I appreciate stealing an hour away from you today. And I'm really excited about kind of where Next.js is, but also where it's going. It sounds like you guys have a lot of incredible things upcoming.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, stay tuned on the performance improvements, especially. Like, I'm super excited for those. So like once we get that out, it will be backwards compatible as well. So like if you don't have custom Webpack config, it's going to be fairly automatic. So yeah, that's going to be cool. And thanks for having me, for sure.
Yeah, thanks. We'll see you soon.